What if feeling bored isn't just dull, but actually gives you a sense of, well, safety?
That's one idea. Or, how about this? Could technology, the constant march forward, be quietly erasing certain kinds of human aspiration?
Exactly. These are some of the really fascinating and sometimes pretty surprising ideas we pulled from the source material for this deep dive.
Yeah, absolutely. Today, we're digging into a collection of notes, reflections, called Dynaxiom Drafts, 528-2025.
It really is like getting a peek into someone's, I don't know, intellectual sketchbook full of these raw thoughts and kind of unexpected links.
And the material covers such a wide range. I mean, everything from what makes creative work feel so personal
Right.
to how technology impacts the whole idea of having skills, the weird comfort of routine, and even some pretty sharp takes on humor and politics.
Okay, so let's start with creativity. The drafts bring up this idea that creative work can sometimes feel like, and this is a quote, a party only you attend.
That phrasing really stands out, doesn't it? The source suggests this feeling comes from, well, the inherent difficulty of real group creativity.
How so?
Well, when everyone brings their own ideas, their own angles, trying to mash them all together, can easily become what the source calls band democracies,
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Where maybe compromise or just different visions kind of waters down the original spark. The notes actually use the Beatles as a key example, pointing out how their solo careers felt almost inevitable, like each of them eventually needed to, quote, throw your own party, to really explore their own thing without that group filter.
That makes sense. And Brian Eno's a mention too, right? Known for often preferring to work alone as a producer.
Yeah.
His whole approach often seems to be about creating conditions for happy accidents, which, let's face it, is probably easier to manage solo or with a very small, controlled group than trying to herd all the cats in a big collaboration.
It really makes you think about that tension, doesn't it, between the energy you get from collaborating and that, I don't know, focused vision you sometimes need for a deep breakthrough.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's shift gears completely now because the drafts have this really counterintuitive take on boredom. They suggest that self-imposed boredom, the kind you choose, can actually create a feeling of safety, security even.
Yeah, that definitely runs against the grain, doesn't it? Our modern impulses just fill every second.
Right.
But the source's angle is that if life feels too exciting, maybe too chaotic, too unpredictable all the time, that can subtly signal instability. The constant stimulation itself can feel, well, precarious.
And the flip side is embracing routine, maybe even a little bit of dullness, can feel grounding. It's why, the notes argue, we often gravitate towards things like, quote, boring banks, boring politics, and boring routines.
Not because they're thrilling.
No, but because their predictability feels secure.
Exactly. The phrase used is quite blunt. Safe, not sorry rules the day, or even a lifetime.
Wow.
It implies this deep, maybe unconscious human trade-off. You sacrifice peak excitement for just a profound sense of stability. It makes you wonder if our constant chase for stimulation today is actually feeding a kind of underlying anxiety.
Okay, now here's what the drafts get, I think, particularly provocative, especially now. They state it directly. Technology kills aspiration.
That's a strong claim, a really strong claim. The core idea presented is that as new tech comes along and makes older tech obsolete, it doesn't just replace tools, it makes the skills tied to those old tools less necessary. And so the dreams, the aspirations linked to mastering those specific things, they can also fade away.
So old dreams get replaced by new ones.
They do, but the source asks, are they really equivalent? Not just different, but maybe fundamentally less demanding, or perhaps less profound in certain ways.
Which leads right into their point about skills. Skills being useful, even if useless. That's another quote.
Right. And the material argues that AI, at least in its current form for most of us, isn't really a skill in that rigorous sense. A bit like when early personal computers first showed up. Look, new tech always creates new skills, sure, but often, initially, only for a small group, the ones building it or implementing it deeply. For most people, the relationship is as users.
And the surprising point from the source is that being a user, even with tools designed for convenience, doesn't always simplify things overall. It might free you from one task, sure.
But it often just redirects that effort or changes what kind of work you end up doing. The washing machine analogy in the drafts is actually quite good here if we look closely. Think about it. A century ago, building a washing machine, that took specific manufacturing skills. But for the person using it at home, huge convenience over the washboard, obviously. But it didn't grant them new skills in doing laundry. Laundry was still a chore, still took time.
Okay, see.
Time that, in the 1950s example given in the source, could maybe have been spent cultivating a different skill, like reading, learning something new, cultural stuff.
Okay, so contrast that, the drafts say, with early personal computers.
Exactly. They did foster new, rigorous skills. At the hardware level, people literally built them from kits, tinkered inside. If you mastered that, you were better placed to grasp software creation, complex use. It demanded more.
And now, with AI, a lot of it is through a browser or a simple chat.
Precisely. So the source argues it feels more like the washing machine again. It kind of disabuses users of needing manual or complex technical effort. It simplifies tasks, yes, but doesn't necessarily build rigorous transferable skills for most people. The, washboard and wringer of complex software installs or command lines are gone.
So the source's point is, AI would be seen as more valuable as a utility if, like that original washing machine, its simplification reliably saved time that people then actually use to get skilled at something else, even if that new skill seemed useless in a purely practical way like mastering chess or learning guitar or deep research.
And the core message here from the drafts seems to be the intrinsic value of just having skills, any skills, and the daily work they require.
Yes, that commitment, that practice.
The caution is that convenience, while it's so appealing, can subtly steer us away from that cultivation. The drafts use that kind of poignant example of the 1950s housewife,
Right.
whose potential unique skills might have just gone to seed because she spent time on newer conveniences like watching a lot of TV or long phone calls, instead of the really demanding practice needed to master something unique. It's a question of what we trade for ease. It really challenges you, doesn't it? To think about whether modern convenience is genuinely freeing us up for new kinds of skill building, or maybe just redirecting us towards less demanding stuff, potentially thinning out our overall capacity or depth.
Building on that tech theme, the drafts also touch on that common anxiety, you hear it everywhere, that AI will somehow take away creativity.
Yeah, and the response from the source isn't really about fighting it head on. It's more of an imperative to adapt, find creativity somewhere else by changing its focus.
And that new focus, the material suggests, is really on synthesis, combination, taking different creative elements, maybe made by humans, made by machines, and uniquely combining them across different forms like art, music, writing.
So the human role becomes more like the curator, the assembler, the one who creates the unique experience by selecting and blending these pieces.
A shift from just generating the raw stuff to mastering the art of composition, maybe.
Exactly. Though the source does add a sort of thoughtful closing note here.
Yeah.
While AI might eventually do synthesis too, we might not actually want machines doing everything we found meaningful and satisfying in the creative process. Something to consider.
Okay, let's dive into a totally different area now. The meaning we find or don't find in music lyrics. The drafts propose that lyrics don't always have to mean something deep right away. That meaning often kind of grows on you over time.
This is where the musical constraint really comes into play. The source argues the primary thing in music, especially pop music, is singability.
Singability.
Yeah. The words just have to fit. The rhythm, the melody, the meter. And that constraint can lead to couplets or phrases that seem totally unrelated or just puzzling.
But they work in the song.
They work perfectly in the song structure, even if the literal meaning is, well, obscure at first. The notes suggest this taps into how natural speech rhythms align with a beat. Some phrases just feel right musically. And the actual act of making lyrics truly meaningful within those musical limits, that takes serious wordsmithing or sculpting, as the source puts it.
And that process might change the original idea.
It absolutely can. The arrangement of the words, kind of dictated by the music, might end up defining the theme more than whatever the lyricist initially intended. The form shapes the content.
The drafts give a specific, almost absurd-sounding AI example here, generating music and lyrics based on something really mundane, like the author's diary entry reflecting on watching Oprah's final show back in 2011.
Right. It sounds silly, maybe pointless.
Yeah.
But the note is that this kind of niche creative novelty, it just wasn't worth the huge hue and effort before.
But now with AI.
Now it's effortless,
Yeah.
possible. It just highlights how technology enables these new forms of creativity, even if they seem trivial at first glance.
You know, scattered through the drafts are these other really potent sort of standalone thoughts. One that really struck me was, we can get our most profound insights from things we didn't see.
That's a powerful thought, isn't it? It implies that our blind spots, the omissions, the things just outside our awareness, they might actually hold deeper truths. or reveal more about a situation than what's right in front of us, looking at the negative space, the absence.
Yeah. The drafts also touch on politics, the nature of political struggle, arguing that dictatorships are an attempt to basically stop time, freeze a moment,
But then adds,
but then adds that the resistance to that can be doing the exact same thing, trying to hold on to or return to something else.
and this connects to the source's view on time versus history. History isn't just a straight line forward, right? It shows patterns repeating, different forces trying to cling to or revert to perceived past states.
So both extremes, the control and the reaction, might be resisting time's unpredictable flow.
That seems to be the suggestion, a resistance to continuous change.
And then there's a simpler, maybe more hopeful thought in there. It's good to play and be playful. That's probably what the universe is doing, just through randomness.
A nice little philosophical note, suggesting maybe undirected exploration, experiments, even chaos. Maybe they're fundamental forces, hinting at a universe that isn't just clockwork, but has an element of pure, maybe even joyful chance.
Okay, finally, the drafts offer this really sharp perspective on popular humor, how it functions today, and the idea that popular humor can, paradoxically, make things less funny.
How so?
Well, the source observes that popular comedians, influential writers, they wield huge influence, right? They shape the collective comedic taste,
Yeah.
which leads to this need, especially online, to constantly sort of check the humor temperature before you make a joke. A subtle pressure towards conformity. What's acceptable, what's funny now, which can actually stifle genuine original humor.
Ah, I see. So the popularity itself creates constraints.
Exactly. And this is where the drafts make a tangential but pretty stark connection to politics.
Okay.
The specific observation from the source, and we're just reporting the source's analysis here, is that Donald Trump's communication style operates much like a form of popular stand-up comedy.
Interesting lens. Stand up.
Yeah, viewing it through the lens of mass entertainment performance rather than just traditional political talk. The drafts describe modern presidents, their cabinets too, as almost taking on celebrity status, getting high ratings in areas other than traditional governing.
Right. And the material pushes this comparison even further, describing the legislative branch. This is vivid, as resembling a gaggle of comedy writers that you'd see in an episode of Hacks.
Wow, Hacks, the show about the aging comedian.
Exactly.
And the drafts bring in that pathos element, remember? The shadow of comedy you see in classic figures like Jackie Mason or Rodney Dangerfield, maybe Andy Kaufman.
Suggesting that behind the performance in these public figures, there's often that layer of vulnerability or complex humanity, just like with those comedians the source mentions.
So the source's perspective is basically that the lines between political communication, popular entertainment, and the dynamics of mass market humor have just gotten incredibly blurry, intertwined, changing how we even perceive political figures and events.
And again, just to be clear, that's the source's analysis of the phenomenon, not our endorsement.
Absolutely. What an incredible journey, though, through one person's mind, all from this one set of drafts. We've touched on, the solitary nature of creativity,
The weird comfort in boredom.
the profound ways tech might reshape skills, aspirations,
How meaning emerges or doesn't in music.
and this really insightful take on humor and the political scene.
Yeah, these ideas don't usually sit together, do they?
Yeah.
But the Dynaxiom Drafts offer this really thought-provoking way to connect them. Our whole aim was just to bring these diverse, valuable nuggets to you and, explore their edges a bit.
So here's a final thought, kind of building on all this material for you to consider. If convenience is nudging us away from cultivating rigorous skill, and if our public political conversations are increasingly taking on the dynamics of popular entertainment and humor, are we maybe losing the capacity for deep engagement, for critical thinking in areas that really, really matter? What kind of skills does it even take to navigate a world that so often feels like a performance?